Well, when you set off on a movie, and here I am working on a movie again, and I just finished doing a movie. I guess it's a sign that you still really care about what you're doing, because under no circumstance do you want to repeat yourself. That's like the kiss of death. And yet, if you've done, if you're doing sort of genre movies, kind of one right after the other, that I could see how that might have been the case. Fortunately, I did not work exclusively in horror films and thrillers and suspense films, sci-fi films. I did some dramas and even some comedies. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. So when I came back to the horror world, I was thrilled to have the fuse lit again. I teach. I teach at USC during the year, just one class, and sometimes I get to go overseas and do some guest teaching, in Spain and this country and that country, even Australia once. But often I will play one or two or three clips from this movie as examples of what I thought were highlights in my own writing. That is this scene in which Tara, the DJ, is pursued and ultimately dies. That's one of my favorite action cues. There's the cue with Damon out in the car in which he gets killed and then ultimately hung. And that was a tough one because of the cross-cutting between Alicia in the car and Damon outside in the forest. And he's getting attacked, but she's sort of like on the radio, she's completely unaware of what's going on. There was that bam, clomp, and then finally the car takes off and she's trying to get away, but she can't because she's tied to the tree. That's another one of my favorite cues. Clusters, what are clusters? Clusters are, how do you define them technically? They're basically groups of one or two or more pitches that are in half steps, or some sort of combination of non-harmonic groupings of pitches, and I wish I could say I invented it, but I didn't, for sure. This American composer named Henry Cowell was the first composer to, realize that a piano, it can be used to create these clusters by bashing. What little babies do, they bash on the piano. They don't care about what the key is, so they just bash on the piano. That was the beginning of it. He was the first to really utilize it in a piano piece. And then, of course, there was that whole Polish school with Penderecki, Ligeti, Ligeti wasn't, he was from Europe, Ludoslavsky, Xenakis, the Greek, and they did all these things where they would have strings in the orchestra doing these big, fat, blocked masses of sound. And I loved it. It never scared me. I always thought it was the voice of God, when I heard it. But it was usurped in horror films and seemed to be a language that served them well. I'm sure Penderecki and Ligeti and Xenakis, Ludoslavsky were not happy when Hollywood sort of took away what they thought was not, it was never intended to scare, these clusters, but never intended to scare anybody. But now, of course, they're still used. If I was to go to this piano and just put my hand on a group of notes and just smash down on it, that's what I mean by cluster. And so there's a lot of that going on in this score. There's nothing, you can't, to have done that score entirely, Urban Legend entirely tonal would have been a mistake. There's certain things that a cluster can do that chords, no matter how complex they are, can't accomplish. And I mean, this is a combination of both. It's not just a cluster score. There's chords and motives, and it's not a great tuned score, I don't think. But there are clusters as well, but they're used hopefully in a meaningful way. When you're writing for clusters, often it's wrongfully thought that cluster scores, they're easy. It's just like a kid pounding on the piano. Isn't that what you just said, Chris? It's like pound. Yeah, No, it can be. You have to use these clusters in the same way that you would if you were writing a tonal score. They have a place, they have a register, they have a meaning they have to develop somehow. And so it all happens in your head. You know, if it's a language that you're attracted to, which I was, and you can imagine these clusters, then use it. If only I could feel completely thrilled with the fact that, you know, I'll be best remembered for all those horror scores that I did, I'd be a happy camper. I'm proud of them. I don't care what the critics say about any of these movies I've done. I don't care if they said something nasty about Urban Legend. I don't care. They're wrong. Okay? So I'm thrilled to have been a part of all those movies because, you know, it gives me the opportunity to write music I couldn't write anywhere else, and apparently it's alive and well in my head. And to deny my love for horror films would be false. I have a love-hate relationship with them, but above and beyond my distaste for the genre is a true love for it. My favorite movies are ones that, you know, are ghost stories, ones in which we do not see. We are required to imagine entirely. Those are the kind of things I love being a part of. So, you know, I only wish that some of my non-horror scores had the same kind of, were able to get the same kind of attention that the horror films have gotten. Hellraiser, sort of little did I know when I worked on Hellraiser, that was probably going to be the one that was going to be etched in my tombstone. Now, there's nothing more boring than hearing someone who's been typecasted complaining. I'm not complaining here, please. I'm the luckiest guy. If Hellraiser's the thing that's not, you know, etched on my, and Urban Legend, which should be above it, by the way, you know, so be it. You know, I'm lucky that I had, you know, that opportunity. And I'm going to close by saying that, you know, I've met a lot of guys who write concert music and have big in the concert music world who will say, geez, I would love to do a film score, but you know what, I'd need about a year to do it. And I go, well, that's not going to happen. I don't know how you guys are able to write so quickly. But the fact of the matter is the language for Urban Legend is the same kind of language we kind of hear. You know, it's more connected to the kind of language that these composers utilize. If a famous concert composer, then I'm not talking about the tonal minimals, I'm talking about ones that use dissonance kind of freely, were to work on a Hollywood movie, guess what kind of movie it would probably be? A horror film. You know, it wouldn't be a love story. You wouldn't see a lot of these modern composers working in horror. I mean, in love stories, but horror films. So I have an affinity with it. I'm proud of what I've done at the end of the day for these movies. And so, though I have been typecasted and wish it was otherwise, on one hand, I would not sell it short.
I was an extraordinary fanboy. And I have these great, deep, primal memories of horror films as a child at the Saturday matinee. And I have these great, and I'm talking 7, 8 years old memories of going to my godfather's house. My godfather was the top salesman west of the Mississippi for the great publisher Simon & Schuster. And he had an entire house full of paperback pocketbook art, and some of it very lurid and wonderful and exciting, and also this coffee table book I talked about earlier. Life magazine goes to the movies with this red cover. And there was a whole section on 30s horror, golden age of horror, with a picture with nipples akimbo of one of the daughters of Dracula, which was sort of, you know, erotic to me. And then there was a great picture of Frankenstein and the little girl by the lake before he breaks her neck like a little flower. She loves me not, she loves me, and throws her into the river. And then there was a 2-page fold out of all the makeups in postage stamp size of Lon Chaney's silent films and early talkies, including one, I think it's called Zanzibar, where he put the hard-boiled egg placentia over the white of a hard-boiled egg over his eyeball, playing a blind man to make it look milky. Probably the first goddamn contact lens. So I was that fanboy. I stood in line for Horrors of the Black Museum and a Japanese horror and all of that. But then I became a theater actor. And Shakespeare and Chekhov and Albee and Pinter and Sam Shepard and George Bernard Shaw. And I became a bit of an Anglophile and a bit of a snob. Now I discovered a whole other group of great actors, Albert Finney, Tom Courtenay, Alan Bates, all of those people. But I sort of hid my love of horror under turtlenecks and corduroy jackets, trying to be this long-haired, classically trained actor that I was. And Wes Craven was the one that finally kind of peeled back the onion and reminded me of all that stuff and how much it really had influenced me and how much I understood it deeply and loved it. So yeah, I've always been a horror fan, and now I have much sympathy for the fans when I meet them at conventions. I love being recognized for all of my other work, and I love people that remember little moments in my other films, that little pieces of business I did or a monologue or something. But I do have great empathy for them as being not indoctrinated, but falling in love with this imaginary, scary world that gets to you a little more emotionally and makes you feel a little more alive when you watch it in the dark. And I think that's probably aided me, like Wes teaching me to respect the genre over the years and helping me make the choice to be loyal to it, which has actually elongated my career. I'm going to be 72, and I have 2 movies out right now, and one of the biggest games in the world, and I just finished doing a virtual reality project for one of the great young directors working right now, Alexandro Aja, and yeah, so I'm real happy with where my career is now. I'm hoping to work real soon with my old buddy Lynn Shay from the original Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and who those of you watching this know from her Insidious franchise and dozens of other films. But yeah, Freddy's been very, very good to me. Horror has been very, very good to me, and it's helped me and my wife see the world, and it's also brought me in touch with a common denominator fan around the world, and that's a real kind of easy way to meet people from different cultures than your own. I bridle a bit, with being an icon. The word icon, or being or even star. I consider myself a working actor, and I'm real proud to be a working actor. And I consider myself a veteran character actor. But here's the thing. Here's the great accident of my career. Great happy accident. I did a science fiction project that was #1 in the world for television, V, miniseries and then a series. And then I did Nightmare on Elm Street in the middle of all that, which was a #1 movie in the world and in America. And then 8 other movies after that, and a series of other horror movies and various sundry projects and television series and things. But the 1-2 punch of starring on V and Nightmare on Elm Street opened the door for me internationally and taught me that horror, science fiction and fantasy, and action, these styles speak the universal language of cinema, and they're understood all over. In America, we couldn't name 5 Spanish comedians or 5 Italian comedians or 5 French comedians. English, yes, because we share a common language. We don't know German comedy. We don't know the romantic comedy stars. But we know they're action stars and they're horror stars. We know Klaus Kinski. We know Mads Mikkelsen. We know we know Dario Argento and Mario Bava, and we know the Australian actors. Again, we have a common language, but we're not crazy for all of the comic actors from Australia or from England. We're not crazy for all the romantic soap opera comedy leads, but we love their action stars and we love their genre stars. And this is this great happy accident that happened to me back in '84. And I was overnight an international actor, and I've done 14 or 15 movies around the world now, everywhere from South Africa to Mexico to Israel, Germany, you know, Romania, Serbia, Italy, Spain, England. I said Romania, but everywhere, but Bulgaria, Russia, and one of the most exotic places on earth, Canada. No. Toronto. I finally figured my way around. No, but it's just this would not have happened had I remained the Americana actor that I was up until that moment of time. I was sort of the Southern best friend and sidekick of a lot of young stars in America, and it's just an accident. No one sets out to be that. You don't necessarily want to be that. Wes taught me to respect it, but it's just a great gift to be an international actor.
You know, I'm a smartass, and I think that, you know, a college frat boy, I wanted to give him some charm. I wanted you to like him and be funny, but he couldn't just be the asshole. It couldn't just be the guy that you're like, oh, he'll die. I tried to bring something at, something more than, and I always do that with roles. I try to say, okay, he's supposed to be, let's play against the grain. Let's make him more likable. But when I came on set, really, Jamie was like, whatever you did in the audition, that's the character. You just keep going with it. And I would just play jokes on the cast and jump out from behind the couch when we're rehearsing and make everybody laugh, even Jared, who never laughs. And I just clicked. It was like being in summer camp, and I never went to summer camp. And it was just, you always think, what would it be like to be in a feature film? So imagine being 26, 27 years old, getting cast, and going with all these other young actors on this big production of a horror movie with a guy who's helming the movie, who's just so lovable, so likable, wants you to succeed. You know, that to me was like, oh my God, this is Hollywood. This is what it is. And I found out later that's not always the case. There's tons of stress. There's tons of politics. There's just a lot of things that usually come with being cast in something, and there's a lot of pressure. And I felt no pressure. It's one of the few times in my life I felt no pressure, so that was easy for me to just bring it. I just remember like one night hanging out at, I think it was Michael McDonald's apartment that he rented. He was a producer, and I remember being on the bed. They had this big bed, and all the cast, except Jared and a couple others, and Gina Matthews, were all just lying on the bed drunk and laughing and talking and looking up at the ceiling. And the more I think about it, the more nostalgic I get, and I start to think, wow, what a blast that was. And I think that you take things for granted, and so many great things. Right now I'm at that stage in my life where I'm learning how to be present, really how to be, mindfulness. And I know people laugh and scoff at it, but like learning how to be present and just enjoying each moment. If you can do that and just enjoy, instead of thinking about the future. And my therapist said, he's like, Michael, you got one foot in the past, you got one foot in the future, and you're pissing on the present, man. You're pissing on. He didn't yell at me though, but it's so true. And that was a moment, again, with no social media and just enjoying 3 months of being with great people who wanted to make a good product and make a great movie. Growing up, being in my room, watching movies, memorizing lines, and just like I remember in The Line of Fire, just learning Malkovich's line. No, remember? I do. No, what you couldn't possibly know, Frank, is that they sent my friend, my comrade in arms to my home to kill me. I never lied to you, Frank, and I never will. And I want to learn that. You have a rendezvous with my asshole, motherfucker. We were filming this one scene, and I was so in my head, like wanting to be great, that sometimes you don't listen, or you don't. It's like the easiest mistake you make as an actor. It's like sometimes you just have to fucking listen, dude. You forget the easiest thing that you were trained to do. Listen to the other person talking and react. It's as simple as that. If you do that, you're gonna be fine. And I remember doing a bunch of takes, and I was like, I don't know, am I nailing this? But the support system was just like, they're like, yeah, we're gonna do it again. We're just gonna keep doing it again. This is what we do. I always feel like take one, I gotta nail it so then we can move on. They're like, we're never moving on after take one. We're moving on after take 10. And so when you start to realize, because I hadn't done a lot of filming, and when I realized, hey, they gotta shoot the hell out of this. This is a major motion picture. We're not just doing one take. And I was used to doing a lot of theater. So that took me a minute to get used to. And it also took me time. I remember Rodney Dangerfield in Caddyshack. He had never done a movie. And he was on set. Dangerfield's on set. And he says a joke. I don't remember what it was. I was like, 4. Hey, I should have called 2 because it hit the guy in the nuts or whatever. And he's there and he's like, in his head. And the Italian guy comes up to him from Caddyshack and goes, hey, Rodney, are you all right? He goes, I'm bombing here, I tell you. I'm bombing. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, nobody's laughing. They can't laugh. Their sound. They can't laugh. He's used to instant gratification, immediate attention, immediate response. And that is a real thing, because I was always used to people laughing and joking and doing a play and saying a line and the audience embracing you. And I had to get used to the fact that you're funny, but no one's laughing. It's a weird thing. You just have to trust yourself and trust that it's funny and trust the director. And it does take some experience. It takes a little time. I love the scene where Parker is on the phone with the killer. And he's going down the stairs. I remember the steady cam, and I'm drunk and, coming down through the party. And then he's like, this is the urban legend where the dog, gets put in the microwave or whatever. And going through the beads into the kitchen and seeing the microwave and the way it was shot and the way it was, the energy of it and just when I opened it up and the jump cuts of like, no, fucking Hootie, fuck. It was just like, I was like, yeah, fucking nailed it. And you don't know what it's gonna be like when you're doing it. It seems like everybody's quiet, no one's making any noise, so the sound's good. And I'm on the phone, I'm like, okay, how's this gonna look? And I just remember that being a great scene. It had a lot of energy. I remember that, even the scene where they introduced Parker and all of us really together in the hall, the mess hall or whatever, and just like messing with Jared Leto and going, bye, Paul, and doing like, all these things and like doing, and then he just like barrels throats ear to ear. And I remember when you film it, it's one thing, and then you watch it with the score and the way it looks, and it pops. And there's a lot of moments in that movie, even the Brad Dourif scene in the opening with Natasha Wagner is just such a great scene in the rain towers, and and he's got that stutter. He's in the back seat or whatever the fuck he says. It's just like, oh my God, this is like, if you really, people appreciate this movie. I think when you watch it again, you see that it was really a well-made, well-cast, well-shot, produced, fun horror movie. And like I said, there's not a lot of those left. So it was really cool to be a part of. Yes, I saw a rough cut at Jamie's, the director Jamie Blanks' house that he was renting in Toronto, and he showed me. I was lucky enough to be the only one. I watched it with him. Do you remember that?
I do.
We watched a rough cut. And I was like, hey, of course, and as an actor, you're like, where's the scene where I'm having sex with Tara Reid's character? It's like, yeah, I don't know. We're going to try and get it in there, man. I'm like, okay, what happened to that one scene where I'm walking down the hallway with Rebecca and I jump out and I scare him? He's like, yeah, we might bring that back. And I was like, of course you're stuck in your head. But I look back and I was like, wow, I left going, this is a really cool movie. And you don't know, especially when you're 26, 3 years out of college, you can't, it's hard for you to fathom, sound production, sound design, special effects, color correction, all these things that make a movie. They always say when you're done with a movie, it's 50% done. And then it's the editing and the music and the score and all that, because it really is. So I saw a movie half done, even though it was this is the entire movie. There's no credit with the credits. Well, it's a rough cut. So I learned right then from Jamie that this is what, now when I made my own movie, when I directed it, when you show it to friends, you're like, so there's not this is rough. It's hard to, you want people around you who are very supportive. And I think that's one of the things about Jamie is he knew, we loved each other. So he was like, hey, I want my boy to see this. And so it was a treat. Jamie, it was just, like I said, it was like college. I might as well have been in a fraternity. I actually kept this. I think this was a gift they gave us. It says Parker, my character name. It says Spring. It's a paddle, I guess, they gave to fraternity guys, and it says 95, and I kept it. I always keep mementos and shit from sets. I have a Jerk poster upstairs signed by Steve Martin. This is a Carrie Fisher. Look at this. She's one of my good friends. She passed away. I love her to death. But she goes, Michael, Get this out of my house. I go, what do you mean? Where do you want me to take it? To your house. You like this shit. I go, you don't like Star Wars? You were in it. You're Leia. What the fuck? She's like, no, I love Star Wars, but I don't need my Star Wars chair here. And she gave it to me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm taking it. So I keep things from movies because my mentality was, growing up, these were my heroes. These were like people I loved and wanted to work with and had posters on the walls and dreamed of one day working with them. So when that becomes a reality, there's like this balance where Steve Martin, I just waited till the last day and said, would you sign my Jerk poster? He goes, well, of course I will. Do you have any Smallville tapes? And I gave him some Smallville, because they were VHS tapes then. And, a couple of my friends were like, dude, I go, don't you get autographs or don't you get pictures taken? They're like, no. I'm like, why? I don't know, it's just kind of weird. It's like, you're working with these people. And I'm like, fuck you, man. I love this shit. I'm never going to stop doing that. Because what's the odds I'm going to work with Clint Eastwood again? Who gives a shit? The way I look at it is like, I'm doing a Clint Eastwood movie. I'm going to get your autograph and your picture. I'm working with Steve Martin. Probably won't work with him again. And I'll tell you what, he's probably not going to go. I'm not hiring him. He asked for my autograph. Get a fucking life. I remember when it came out, opening weekend, I brought a bunch of my friends. We had a limo for the night. I think Columbia TriStar paid for it. And we dressed up and we went from theater to theater to watch it with an audience. We just stayed for like 10 minutes at AMC or 10 minutes at, Trimark or wherever the fuck we were and we would watch like 10 minutes of it, and then a couple of times I'd wait till the end and I'd walk out and I go, I'm the guy, I'm Parker, I'm the guy with the Drano, the thing in my mouth. You remember that? And they're like, oh, dude. But I hadn't really been recognized at all in my life until Urban Legend came out. And then I went to a horror convention in New Jersey. And I was just there as a fan, visiting like the guy who played like Flyboy on Dawn of the Dead. And like, I wanted to meet him. I paid $10 for his autograph and hanging out with like, seeing Lou Ferrigno. I'm like, oh my God, it's great. And somebody's like, dude, were you in Urban Legend? I'm like, yeah. He's like, what are you doing walking around, man? I'm like, I'm a fan. I'm here to just meet people like you. Can I have your autograph? I'm like, that will cost you $10. No, I didn't. Urban Legend really resonated with such a big audience is because it just was like, it was made so well. And it was the time, it was like people wanted some good horror movies, some quality horror movies. They wanted to be scared. They wanted, they had Scream, but they wanted something different. It was a unique story. It was a unique, I think people just crave that. And I still think they crave it. And I crave horror movies more than anybody, except maybe the guys that are hanging out here today. But I'm always wanting a scare. I'm like, movies don't scare me anymore. It's seldom. I just saw a movie like 2 weeks ago and the hype was just unbelievable. And I thought it was pretty good, but it wasn't like what everybody said it was. And there wasn't that sort of hype with movies then. People went to movies to see movies, to experience it without Rotten Tomatoes, to just go and enjoy a movie. Oh, there's a horror movie playing, Urban Legend. I like that idea. Oh, let's go see this. And they enjoyed it, and the movie made a lot of money, and people liked it. But now it's like, oh, Rotten Tomatoes says this, or somebody will say this about something. And it's just like, it just makes the moviegoer experience a little less exciting. I remember in the 80s, like there was a movie playing down at the cinema. I'd cut it through a few yards in Indiana and I'd go watch whatever it was and just enjoy it for what it was. And but now I wish they'd make better horror movies. I think the quality of Urban Legend was fantastic and it had the scares and it had all the fun stuff. And I think that's what a lot of horror movies are missing now.
What horror films did you like as a kid? I mean, I think that's important. You're a horror fan, so what was your favorites? It's a good idea of who you are.
I'm a huge, look, it's easy to say, everybody's probably like, of course, but like The Shining, I watched it probably 1,000 times. I know almost every line of that movie, and you got no business going in that room 237. You called him Doc. Well, that's funny. Well, maybe I just heard you guys talk. I was like, yeah, it's possible, but I don't think we said it. I just remember, but like that movie, The Omen, with Gregory Peck, scary movies with great stories. When a Stranger Calls, the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes of that movie, there's no scarier movie than that in the first 10 and the last 10. Did you check the children? Do you remember the moment when he calls on the phone? She's like, what do you want? He's like, your blood. all over me. And you're like, oh my God. And back in the 80s, that's why it was so great. Even the 90s, this is why urban legend worked. No social media, no cell phones. There was like, that was the scare. You couldn't call mom. You couldn't call the cops. You couldn't, she's on a phone. And he's like, hey, we traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. She's like, ah. There was like this holy shit isolated feeling of movies back then. That's why the best horror movies were the 70s and 80s, even 90s. And, you know, to me, The Exorcist 3, which we were talking about. I mean, movies that have scares and good stories and are shot well with great actors. And the great thing is you don't need big names for horror movies. And I just never understand that. It's like, we got to get these in. Listen, you don't need big actors for good movies. We were mostly unknowns. You could have put any actor in there that was good, and Urban Legend would have been good. Anybody in the screen, they were all unknowns. And I liked how Jamie did that for the most part. Wes Craven did that. And when you just like, you're not worried so much about star status and star meter. I think that you just worry about talent. Let's put talent in here. Let's let the guy who's auditioning, who kills it, put him in the movie because he deserves it and he's great and the movie's going to be better for it. So, but I love so many horror movies. Return of the Living Dead is probably one of my favorites in history. I mean, because it's fun and it's scary. Of course, Dawn of the Dead, even the new Dawn of the Dead that my friend James Gunn wrote was great. Zack Snyder directed. I really enjoyed that. I think it was a unique, cool way of telling that same story. I think everything's cyclical. I think that everything comes back around. It's like, you know, I've sold scripts where they're like, oh, we're not looking for that now. But I'm like, maybe they will. They'll eventually, it comes back because you run out of ideas. And that's why it's hard for me these days. And I hate to be like movie Nazi. But I feel like, you know, without saying studios, I think that it's like, do you remember the time when there'd be one big movie, like Star Wars came out, Empire Strikes Back, and then you have to wait 6 months for like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and next year Back to the Future. I feel like it's not that people don't put as much passion in the movies anymore, but they're like on a cycle. It's like, this has to be out then. This has to be June 1st. This has to be June 30th. This has to be July 1st. And so there's so many movies, and it's, I hate, again, oversaturated for lack of a better word. But you used to wait for these big movies to come out. Like Urban Legend was a big horror movie, big production value, and you were like excited about it. And I think that these movies come out every week, and I just sort of like, I'm numb to it. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, it's the same movie told the same way with the same special effects with, oh yeah, that's cool. But it just, to me, I'm always been a horror movie fan. People don't understand that because they're like, oh, you're Lex Luthor. You love superhero stuff. I'm like, here's a secret. I really don't care about it. I grew up with horror movies, Fangoria magazines. I locked myself. It was an escape for me, horror and like being scared. It's adrenaline. It's like going on a roller coaster and just fucking, when you get that scare, to me, that is happiness for me. As macabre as it may sound, I fucking love the genre. And when it's done well, like there's been a couple movies that have just like gone, I'm like, perfect. Even if they're not the scariest, it follows, unique, well-directed, cool story, some creepy moments, loved it. The first Insidious, for the most part, 80% of that movie is pretty fucking scary. You know? Hereditary was, you know, had moments. Again, why do people need to make 2.5 hour movies now? What is that about? In the 80s, 70s, a lot of times the movies were like an hour and a half, hour 40, maybe an hour and 50, but stop. Stop making movies that are 2:20. I gotta take a piss, I gotta shit, I'm hungry, I got cramps. I don't wanna see it fucking, but I don't know. I'm old, man. I'm old. At the time I was 26, 27, Jamie's 26, 27. I could barely like make myself food to eat. And this guy's helming a major motion picture, shooting in Toronto, his first movie. And I remember he showed me like trailers of like, he did like a trailer sort of for like, I Know What You Did Last Summer 2 or whatever. The first one, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and he showed me a trailer, I'm like, and they're just the angles and the crane shots and the water along the ocean and the car along the ocean. And I'm like, this guy has a vision. He's got something. And there was no ever questioning him for me. I think everybody believed in this guy, and that's why he was able to put this together and make this. And he's one of those guys, I remember him telling me the story, when he went in to pitch it, he was nervous as fuck, and the producer's like, hey, come on, you're sweating. You know, and it's hard. It's hard to go into a room and please everybody. and let them believe that you're the guy that they're going to give all these millions of dollars to make a movie without, again, it's that confidence thing. You got to show, even if you're shitting your pants, you fucking shit your pants and dive in. That's why Jamie should direct another movie, because people love him. I tell him this all the time. And what happens is, in this business, again, you make a great movie. And then, you know, he did Valentine's Day. It was the biggest box office that they wanted. It's like, they don't realize that it doesn't matter. Give him something good or great, and he's gonna fucking, he's gonna make it happen. And I think that, you know, and Jamie lives in Australia. And I think he's one of the most talented guys ever. And what he did with that movie and with the budget and with the whole thing just works from beginning to finish. It's such a fun movie, and it stands the, you know, the test of time. And I think that I tell him, I'm like, there's something left in the tank, buddy, and I better be a fucking part of it, because I did this fucking interview in my basement. Fuck you. Fuck off. I'm out of here. Fuck you.
Right. I had worked with Michael McDonald on the movie The Replacement Killers. I was a set PA and driver for Antoine Fuqua. And I was involved in post-production as well. And Michael and I got to know each other better in post-production, I think. And we wrapped Replacement Killers in December. And in January, he called me and said, I've got this movie. It's shooting in Toronto. I'm only going to need you for 2 weeks to set up the production office at Phoenix Pictures. I'm only going to pay a PA rate. So, and you have to use your own personal computer. Will you help me? And I said, let's go, you know. And so I remember lugging my desktop computer back in the day, you know, and we going to Phoenix Picture, and it was just Michael and I opening up that office. Yeah, he told me it was a horror movie, and at that point I didn't care. I just wanted to work again. I had just bought a new car. I had to make the payments, and so I said yes. But it was only literally going to be for the months that they were going to prep in LA, because the company was going to move to Toronto, and I was not allowed to go to Toronto. The thing is, when I was little, I was too chicken to see horror movies. There was only a handful of movies that I watched, the classics, of course. My brother showed An American Werewolf in London to me when I was about 7. And I had nightmares for months after that. And so it took me a while to make the nerve to my next horror movie, which was A Nightmare on Elm Street. And that just changed everything. I was blown away by A Nightmare on Elm Street. So I liked horror movies. Poltergeist was another big one for me. But I did not know enough horror movies until I met Jamie Blanks. He was my film school for horror movies. There had been so many I missed, and he's, oh, you haven't seen that one, mate? Well, let's go. You got to put this one on. And we would watch that movie and watch the next movie. I'm ashamed to admit that I had not seen Halloween until I met Jamie Blanks, and that was incredible. The first time I met Jamie, I had to meet him at his hotel. He was staying at the hotel on Pico and Beverly Drive. And I had to drop something off to him for Michael, and I went up to the room to see him. He had this little mini CD player with him with all these soundtracks. And when I came in there, I think he was listening to the soundtrack to Escape from New York. And we started talking about soundtracks and movie music. And I think that's when we, you know, immediately bonded, knowing that this is a film geek like we are. And I was excited to meet him because you hear these stories of how he got the job. Right? He went off and shot a trailer of I Know What You Did Last Summer and did an amazing job at that, and we all saw that. And my goodness. And so, you know, he had the balls to do that, and he did. And unfortunately, it had arrived a day before they had hired another director for that movie, but Neil Moritz kept him in mind, and when this movie came up, Neil hired him for it, and so much the better. I thought that was great. This was my first movie as an assistant. I had been a PA before and a driver for other directors, but not an assistant. And I really didn't know a lot of the things that an assistant was supposed to do. And thank God Michael was there to pinpoint me. And I remember the first day we were in Toronto, about to take off to go on a location scout. I remember asking Jamie, do you need me for this? Because I got some other work to do. He's like, no, mate, you're fine. You do the work that you need to do, because I did have a lot of backlog. And the bus took off. And then literally 10 minutes, like 5 minutes later, there's another phone call from Michael. Get your ass on the bus right now. You go where the director goes. That's your job. You know, I was like, okay, great. So that's the way I learned that way, you know. So everywhere Jamie went, I know I was supposed to go.